Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are following the money, specifically how enormous, often opaque, private fortunes are engineered to reshape the American political and economic landscape. We're talking about structural change here, aren't we?
Yeah.
Not just who wins the next election cycle.
Exactly. It's about fundamentally altering the rules of the game. You sent us a powerful stack of sources detailing the infrastructure of modern political influence, often called dark money, alongside broader academic studies on wealth and inequality.
Right.
Our mission today is really to unpack the complex legal and operational structures used by some of the wealthiest individuals, like, for instance, the Kochs, to execute what some sources describe as a successful systematic takeover of policy.
And takeover. Wow.
Well, that's the language used in some reports, leveraging secrecy and, importantly, scale. This isn't just about, campaign contributions anymore. It's about building a kind of shadow government, a parallel power structure.
Yeah. And we're drawing mainly from deep investigative reports, looking into that hidden history of billionaires behind the rise of certain radical political movements. Also some crucial economic critiques from thinkers like Thomas Piketty and Francis Fukuyama. It's a fascinating and, frankly, pretty unnerving stack to confront.
It really is. And the core question we need to tackle, I think, is highly consequential for everyone. How did a handful of wealthy individuals achieve what established political parties often struggle to do?
Which is?
Fundamentally shift the center of American politics and permanently alter the policy environment, often entirely out of the public view. How does that actually happen?
Okay, let's unpack this then. We should start with the engine, right? The immense, lightly regulated system designed to hold and deploy private wealth for public ends. And that means starting with the foundations, doesn't it? The blueprint for this whole operation. The rise and maybe the transformation of private foundations.
Yes, absolutely. To understand the modern dark money machine, you really have to look at its historical roots, which are somewhat ironically philanthropic. The granddaddy of modern foundations was the Rockefeller Foundation.
Right, the original one.
The original. And when it was legally established, its charter was quite restrictive. It was limited to promoting only education, science, and religion. A narrow, clearly defined public mission focused on generally accepted public good.
But those historical limits, the ones meant to stop private funds having too much political sway, they haven't just loosened. It feels like they've largely dissolved.
That's a fair assessment based on the evidence. The scale of growth here is just unbelievable. When we talk about $800 billion being leveraged, it's easy to lose sight of how quickly these structures multiplied.
Give us a sense of that curve.
Well, the growth curve really illustrates the scale of the transformation. By 1930, sources suggest there were approximately 200 private foundations in the U.S.
Okay, 200.
That number swelled to about 2,000 by 1950. Still manageable, perhaps. But the real acceleration happened later. By 1985, around 30,000 foundations existed.
30,000?
And wait for it. By 2013, the sources show there were over 100,000 private foundations in the United States.
100,000?
Collectively holding assets exceeding $800 billion. This is just a massive pool of capital sitting there, often in perpetuity.
$800 billion. And theoretically, it's meant to be serving the public good. But here's the rub, right? The paradox of accountability that comes with these huge tax-exempt pools of wealth, our sources call this the Goliath problem.
It is. It's an inherent flaw, or perhaps feature, depending on your perspective, in the structure.
Wow.
These Goliaths, these perpetually endowed foundations, they operate in the public policy realm. They influence everything from judicial appointments to environmental regs.
Huge impacts.
Yet they have virtually no transparency or accountability to voters or, consumers. And the critical point, the really crucial point, is that they are publicly subsidized.
Also?
Through generous tax breaks. The public is, in effect, funding the vehicle used by the ultra-wealthy to influence the political decisions that directly affect them. Your tax dollars help subsidize the foundation that then lobbies for policies you might oppose.
And this isn't just a critique from one side of the political spectrum, is it? I mean, we saw that observation from the iconoclastic libertarian legal scholar Richard Posner. He looked hard at this system.
He did, and he didn't mince words. He didn't just criticize it. He called perpetual charitable foundations a completely irresponsible institution answerable to nobody.
Answerable to nobody.
He actually said he found it a deep puzzle in economics why these foundations are not total scandals. Coming from Posner, a libertarian, that's quite a statement.
Why did he see them as so irresponsible? What was the core issue for him?
Posner's point is profound because he identifies the core problem. Perpetuity. Once endowed, these funds can pursue missions indefinitely, long after the donor is gone, regardless of changes in societal need or public opinion.
Right, the original donor's intent might be totally outdated, but the money keeps flowing.
Exactly. And the small group of trustees controlling the endowment wields immense perpetual power without any real check from a market or consumers or voters. So the implication, the unavoidable implication, is that this environment allows vast sums of private capital to shape public outcomes, often far removed from the democratic process.
While using tax subsidies to do it.
While leveraging those tax subsidies to achieve sweeping policy and political goals, it's a powerful, self-perpetuating engine.
Okay, so we've established the engine of funding, this $800 billion tax advantage pool of quote-unquote philanthropic capital.
Yeah.
Now let's track exactly how that capital gets converted into political action and secrecy. This requires us to talk about the legal plumbing, right? The distinction between the philanthropic structure and the political weapon.
This is the absolutely critical link. The $800 billion largely resides in what are called 501c3 organizations. These are your traditional charitable foundations, universities, churches, things like that.
The ones where donations are tax deductible.
Correct. Contributions are tax deductible for the donor. But, and this is key, C3s are highly restricted politically. They generally cannot engage in substantial lobbying or any political campaigning. Doing so risks their tax-exempt status.
Okay, so the C3 holds the money but can't really use it for direct politics. So how does the influence happen?
This is where the brilliant maneuver used extensively by modern influence networks like the Koch network, according to these sources, comes in. They funnel money either directly from private wealth holders or sometimes grants from the C3 foundations themselves.
Wait, the C3 can grant money to a political group?
It can grant money to another nonprofit, including a 501c4 social welfare organization, as long as the grant is designated for general educational or social welfare purposes, not explicit electioneering. It's a fine line, but legally permissible.
Okay, so the C4s, these are the dark money vehicles we hear about. How are they different and why are they such effective weapons?
They are the perfect political weapon for several reasons. First, contributions to C4s are not tax deductible. That's a key difference from C3s.
Okay, so no tax break for donating to a C4.
Right. But crucially, C4s are allowed to engage in significant political activity. Lobbying, issue ads, voter mobilization. The IRS rule is a bit fuzzy, but generally understood to mean up to 49.9% of their budget can be spent on political purposes as long as their primary purpose remains social welfare.
Almost half their activity can be purely political.
Can be. And here's the absolute kicker. C4s are legally permitted to keep their donors entirely secret.
No disclosure, none.
None required to the public or the FEC. They do not have to reveal who is funding their multi-million-dollar policy campaigns, their attack ads, their sophisticated lobbying efforts. That's why it's called dark money.
So let me trace the path. Private wealth, maybe sitting in a C3 foundation to shield it from taxes and let it grow.
Yeah.
That capital can then be granted or indicted toward these C4 sister organizations like Americans for Prosperity, which the sources mention frequently in relation to the Kochs.
Correct. That's a prime example often cited.
And the C4 then executes the political mission fighting regulations, pushing specific legislation, running issue ads with complete secrecy about who's footing the bill. It's like an insulated political machine, subsidized at the start with tax breaks for the C3, and then operating in the dark.
Precisely. It enables systemic policy capture because opponents often don't even know who is funding the attack against them. And this entire structure, the need for secrecy and leverage, it only intensifies when you consider the broader economic backdrop we talked about earlier.
Right, the extreme concentration of wealth we've seen over the last few decades.
That connection is vital.
So that's the perfect transition. How does this explosion of available capital in these foundations intersect with that general phenomenon of wealth concentration in the economy? Because it feels like these two trends must reinforce each other, creating this feedback loop of influence that makes the political action almost, well, necessary for those at the top.
They absolutely reinforce each other. Thoughtful economists and academics, people like Lawrence Summers, Francis Fukuyama, they've expressed deep concern about this. They note that the highest earners, particularly in finance and, CEOs of global corporations, are prospering wildly, just extraordinarily well.
While everyone else.
While the median wage earner is stagnating, has been for decades in real terms. And this trend isn't just about inequality statistics. It threatens the viability of the middle class and, as they argue, risks overwhelming the political system itself, because such concentration almost inevitably seeks political protection.
It needs to defend itself.
It needs to defend itself, and it has the resources to do so effectively.
We see that disparity detailed really acutely in the work of Thomas Piketty, especially regarding top earners. It's not just a smooth curve upwards. It's like there's a rocket ship taking off at the very, very top. He calls it a discontinuity, right?
That's exactly right. Piketty notes a very sharp discontinuity at the apex of the income distribution, particularly in the U.S. If you look at what he calls the 9%, those earning, say, between $100,000 and $200,000 a year, their incomes progress only slightly faster than the average worker. You know, the upper middle professional class.
Still doing okay, but not stratospheric.
Exactly. However, the 1%, those making over $500,000, and especially those over $1 million, Piketty says their remuneration literally exploded. Their growth rate was fundamentally different from everyone else's below them.
Okay, let me push on this a bit. If I'm tracking this, when wealth concentrates at that extreme top, when the paychecks of the absolute highest earners just explode like that, doesn't that inherently create an existential risk for the people holding that wealth? I mean, can't the wealthy simply enjoy their riches without building this massive, complex political superstructure? Why is the political action so necessary?
That's the critical insight from these analyses. The political action becomes almost inevitable because extreme wealth concentration is inherently fragile if the rules of the game can be changed by democratic means. Meaning, if voters decide they want higher taxes on extreme wealth, or stronger environmental regulations that impact certain industries, or tougher antitrust enforcement, those democratic decisions pose a direct threat to the concentrated wealth and the business models that generated it.
So the political spending isn't just about getting more, it's about preventing loss.
It's fundamentally about preserving the status quo that allowed the wealth explosion in the first place. Maintaining the low regulatory environment, the favorable tax codes, the specific legal interpretations. That's the goal. So political spending, especially through the opaque C4 dark money machine, is essentially an insurance premium on that extreme wealth. It becomes a cost of doing business at that level.
And that leads directly to weaponized lobbying and campaigning.
Directly, because the stakes are so high and the resources available are so vast.
Okay, so that concentration provides the massive financial firepower needed to fund the sophisticated mechanisms we're about to discuss. We've established the engine, the foundations, and the C4s. Now let's look at how that engine powers the political weapon. The professionalization of what's often called fake grassroots pressure, universally referred to, often derisively, as astroturf.
Yes, this brings us directly to the operational phase. How is the money actually deployed on the ground? And we can use the fight against healthcare reform, specifically the Affordable Care Act, ACA, as a perfect detailed case study. The sources really dive into this.
Right, the ACA battle, 2009 and 2010. The conservative opposition, heavily funded by networks like the one we're discussing, they realized early on that just writing policy papers wasn't generating enough political heat.
Exactly. Their initial focus on traditional D.C. lobbying and think tank reports wasn't moving the needle enough on key senators. They needed a systematic operational shift to derail the legislation, particularly during the crucial summer of 2009.
What was the goal then, operationally?
The mission was stark and, frankly, quite aggressive. As one operative running the opposition campaign reportedly told a journalist, "We knew we had to make that summer absolute hell."
Absolute hell.
For whom? For members of Congress, particularly persuadable senators in swing states. The goal was to generate intense, visible, seemingly widespread constituent pressure, especially during the August recess when lawmakers go home, hold town halls, and are typically more accessible.
They needed to create the appearance of genuine, overwhelming constituent outrage, even if the issue wasn't initially top of mind for many actual constituents.
Precisely. Manufacture the outrage, make it impossible for a senator to ignore.
And that's where the AstroTurf campaigns really kicked into high gear. This isn't just buying billboards. This is deep, systematic organization designed to look spontaneous. Who was instrumental in professionalizing this phony grassroots pressure, according to the sources?
The sources point significantly to figures like Doug Goodyear and his public relations firm, DCI Group. They were apparently instrumental in this professionalization. DCI Group and similar firms realized you couldn't just hope for authentic outrage to materialize at the right time and place.
You had to schedule it.
You had to schedule it, fund it, organize it, and direct it strategically.
And DCI Group, they had a track record here, didn't they? The sources mentioned they sort of set the standard for deceptive practices long before the ACA fight, going way back.
Yes, the sources trace their roots back to working for industries like big tobacco, which really pioneered deceptive advertising and creating simulated grassroots support, so-called smokers' rights groups, for instance, often funded secretly by the industry itself.
So they took those techniques and applied them to broader political fights.
They refined them and scaled them up massively. They transformed political spending. Instead of simple overt advertising like just buying a TV spot saying vote no, it became this systematic, sophisticated operational effort.
What did that look like on the ground during the ACA fight?
For the ACA opposition, according to the reports, this involved meticulous planning. It meant things like pre-printing signs with coordinated messages, organizing and funding busloads of protesters to show up at specific town halls in specific districts of targeted senators.
So it wasn't just local people showing up spontaneously.
Often not, or at least significantly augmented by organized groups. It also allegedly involved hiring professional organizers to train people on how to effectively disrupt meetings, what questions to ask, how to generate media attention, and sometimes, the sources even suggest, paying people who looked like ordinary concerned citizens to attend and voice opposition.
Wow. It's political theater, isn't it? Designed not to persuade the voter through argument, but to overwhelm the legislator with perceived anger and create a media narrative.
A media narrative that screams mass constituent rage. And critically, it obscures the true source of that anger, the funding flowing secretly through the C4s. The political goal is to make it politically toxic for a persuadable senator to support the bill, making them believe their constituents are overwhelmingly against it, even if the outrage was largely manufactured and imported.
And that operational success is key then. It shows the money wasn't just spent on ads that people might ignore. It bought an effective ground game, a disruptive ground game that could rival or even overwhelm the organizing capacity of major political parties or unions.
Absolutely. It proved that political action, when treated as a massive systematic capital investment using these kinds of sophisticated operational tactics, can yield predictable results. It's politics as applied industrial strategy.
Okay, so while this political weapon was being honed domestically, fighting battles like the ACA, we should probably zoom out for a moment. Connect this to the broader global context of how the wealthy elite maintain and amplify their power. Things like political connections, the revolving door.
Yes, that's a good point. If we connect this to the bigger picture, especially looking at the global dynamics of wealth and power discussed in sources like Chrystia Freeland's Plutocrats, we find similar patterns worldwide.
Such as?
Well, one striking observation is the growing number of politicians who are themselves members of the financial elite, or who move seamlessly between government and high finance. The line between serving in Washington and serving on Wall Street, or in corporate boardrooms, is increasingly blurred.
Creating a shared culture, maybe shared interests?
A common culture, shared networks, and potentially shared interests. It creates an ecosystem where policy is often discussed and decided in circles that are dominated by or highly sympathetic to the interests of concentrated wealth.
Is that why there was that academic interest a while back in whether serving in Washington yielded what they called abnormal returns on stock investments?
Wow.
The idea that political inside knowledge translates directly into financial windfalls.
Exactly. That research generated a lot of buzz. While one follow-up study later challenged the finding of direct stock market outperformance based purely on being in Congress, the underlying concern remains highly relevant.
Which is?
The perception, and often the reality, of access and influence. The constant revolving door regulators moving to lucrative jobs in the industries they once regulated, financiers taking senior government positions, creates an environment where the financial elite often feel they have unique insight and access. The real abnormal return might not be stock tips, but favorable policy outcomes over the long run.
And we see very public examples of this intersection between political celebrity and massive wealth accumulation, don't we? The sources note the Clintons, for example, earning something like $111 million between 2000 and 2007 after leaving the White House.
Yes, that figure is often cited, and it illustrates how high-level political engagement doesn't just end with public service. It generates an immense network, a deep understanding of political and economic leverage, and a public profile that can translate into enormous post-public service wealth through speeches, consulting, board memberships, and so on.
Which reinforces the power and exclusivity of these elite networks, ultimately benefiting the wealthy donor class that operates within them or seeks access to them.
It creates a self-sustaining ecosystem. The concentration of wealth allows these networks to flourish. The C4 dark money funds the think tanks pushing specific ideologies. It funds the astroturf armies applying political pressure. It funds the lobbyists writing the legislation.
And those efforts yield favorable policy outcomes.
Which, in turn, often further accelerates wealth concentration, providing even more capital for the next political cycle. It's a closed loop.
Okay, let's try and pull all these threads together before we look at the ultimate ambition here. You've got these massive, opaque charitable pools, the $800 billion Goliaths, subsidized by tax breaks.
Right, the C3s.
They provide funding, often indirectly, to highly sophisticated, secretive political operations, like the AstroTurf campaigns, run by firms like DCI Group, operating through the C4 structure.
The dark money arm.
These campaigns then blur the line between genuine grassroots action and paid, systematic political mobilization. All while the individuals and corporations funding this benefit from an economic system that favors their accumulating wealth, a system they are actively working to preserve and enhance through this political action. It really is a closed loop designed for structural self-amplification.
That's an excellent summary.
Yeah.
And that cycle isn't just about maintaining the status quo. It's explicitly designed to alter the very foundations of the regulatory state in which they operate, which brings us to the ultimate goal, the end game.
Right. Section 3, the end game. Because this isn't just about winning tactical battles like the ACA fight or getting specific tax cuts. The forces suggest something much bigger, much more fundamental.
Absolutely. The sources indicate that the ambition of key funders, particularly figures associated with the Koch network, extends far beyond specific elections or fighting a single piece of legislation. For some involved, the efforts in, say, 2014 were seen merely as a trial run, a scaling-up exercise.
For what?
For the 2016 presidential race and beyond. Their long-term sights, according to these investigative reports, were set on gaining structural control, or at least dominant influence, over all three branches of government: Congress, the executive branch, and crucially, the judiciary.
All three branches, that's total.
It's a total, decades-long structural power play, designed to ensure the permanent dominance of a specific ideology. Generally, free market principles, minimal regulation, reduced government spending, and strong private property rights. It's about changing the entire landscape permanently.
And we get some chilling insights into the mindset behind this, don't we? From people who are actually inside the operation, we get a very clear picture of the ideological justification, often framed in terms of corporate freedom or libertarianism.
That's right. The core motivation was described very bluntly by one source, Phil Dubose, identified as a former Kochs Industries manager. He defined their ultimate goal simply as to get their own way.
To get their own way.
And when they use labels like libertarian, Dubose's interpretation, grounded in his reported experience inside the operation, was apparently far from some abstract academic philosophy.
What was his operational interpretation of their libertarianism?
He stated, quite starkly according to the source, what it means is that if you're big enough to get away with it, you can get away with it. No government.
Wow. If you're big enough to get away with it, you can get away with it. No government. That's a profoundly honest, if brutal, assessment.
It suggests that the sophisticated, tax-advantaged political machine isn't primarily about achieving some pure ideological utopia. It's about maximizing operational latitude and minimizing regulatory interference and risk, especially for large corporations and concentrated capital. The ideological framework, the commitment to minimal government, becomes the sophisticated public justification for what is, at its core, a power maximization strategy.
That is a brutally, almost shockingly candid assessment of what could be called a hostile takeover mindset applied to government itself. If the ultimate goal is dismantling regulatory safeguards based on the principle that the biggest players should be able to get away with anything, what's the consequence for the rest of society, for the rest of the economy?
Dubose was asked that directly, according to the source material. If that level of unrestrained corporate freedom, that no government ideal were achieved, what happens next?
And his answer?
He reportedly stated that the result for the country would be that it would release the dogs.
Release the dogs, meaning?
He apparently saw the dismantling of the regulatory state not as liberation, but as unleashing predatory corporate behavior, unchecked power leading to unchecked exploitation.
And what about ordinary citizens, the wage earners, the middle class, the people who don't have billions in capital and a C4 network providing political protection? What happens to them in that scenario?
When asked specifically about the fate of ordinary people, the source attributes this chilling, unforgettable answer to Dubose. The little people, they'd get gobbled up.
Gobbled up. That is the language of raw power asserting dominance over the weak. It really removes any ambiguity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It frames this entire infrastructure not as promoting general welfare, but as ensuring winners and losers in a system explicitly designed to favor the powerful and explicitly hostile, or at best indifferent, to the interests of the common citizen. It's presented as a zero-sum game.
And it's important to note, this kind of mindset isn't entirely new, nor is it strictly American. If we look historically and globally, we see similar patterns where concentrated financial power asserts dominance, especially over weaker political systems or during periods of economic crisis.
Right, you mentioned the global plutocrats earlier. We can draw a parallel, maybe, to the rise of certain types of global businesses like the big commodity traders. Firms like Mark Rich plus Co., which eventually became Glencore, seem to operate on similar principles on a global scale.
That's a very relevant parallel discussed in the sources. These commodity trading houses, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, used their financial firepower and their mastery of opaque, unregulated global markets to great effect.
How so?
They would seize on the economic weakness of entire countries. The example of Jamaica in the 1970s is often cited, or states struggling during the collapse of the Soviet Union. Because traditional big Western companies were often hesitant and Wall Street banks hadn't fully penetrated these markets yet, traders like Mark Rich became effectively the last bank in town.
The lender of last resort, almost.
Exactly. And they leveraged that position of financial necessity to extract enormous rents. They secured long-term financing deals that gave them control over essential national resources, oil, minerals, grain, operating in that opaque, lightly regulated environment with very little public scrutiny.
So whether the target is a financially weak nation-state back then, or the regulatory structure of a powerful democracy like the U.S. today, the underlying pattern seems similar.
The pattern is consistent. Concentrated capital operates most effectively in an opaque environment. It exploits structural weaknesses, information asymmetry, and a lack of regulation or enforcement to ensure vast, often perpetual profitability. They leverage their scale, whether it's controlling global oil supply chains or controlling political narratives through C4 funding, to essentially raise the rents they charge the real economy and ultimately the political system itself.
And this inherent tension, this idea where progress, whether technological or financial, leads primarily to extreme inequality, it echoes way back, doesn't it? Back over a century to America's first Gilded Age.
It absolutely does. We really should recall Henry George, the 19th century economist and social reformer. He wrote about this very paradox, the persistence of poverty alongside incredible material progress. He called it the Great Sphinx, this riddle of why progress seemed to benefit so few.
What was his observation?
He witnessed the technological leaps of the Industrial Revolution fueling unprecedented progress, but he saw that the increased wealth generated didn't lift all boats. It served mainly to build up great fortunes. And he argued passionately that this kind of progress actually sharpened the contrast between the House of Have and the House of Want.
And George had a warning, too, didn't he, about the sustainability of that kind of progress?
He did. He warned that so long as that wealth goes only to build great fortunes, progress is not real and cannot be permanent. It creates social instability and ultimately undermines the foundations of the society itself.
So the modern dark money infrastructure we've been discussing, it's like the systematic, hyper-professionalized, legally fortified sharpening of that contrast between the House of Have and the House of Want.
That's a powerful way to put it. It's codifying that inequality through policy changes, achieved largely outside of democratic accountability or transparency. The key difference, perhaps, between Henry George's Gilded Age and ours is that today's economic elites have successfully built these incredibly sophisticated legal structures, the C3-C4 network, the think tanks, AstroTurf machines to ensure the perpetuation of their influence, often with a public subsidy via the tax code.
Okay, that's a powerful synthesis as we wrap up. Let me try and summarize this whole deep dive. What we've seen is that the rise of dark money isn't just about funding elections or running TV ads, as important as those are.
No, it's much deeper than that.
It's really about building a permanent, tax-advantaged political machine, complete with the C3 foundations providing the endowment, the C4 political advocacy arms doing the secret work, the network of policy think tanks generating the intellectual justifications, and the professional AstroTurf operations manufacturing grassroots pressure.
A fully integrated system.
And this machine is designed, fundamentally, to alter the regulatory and legal environment in favor of concentrated capital, all justified by a specific ideology that, when you peel it back, seems to privilege unrestrained corporate power above almost all else.
And the architects of this network, particularly the Koch network, as detailed in the sources, demonstrated something profound. They showed that by treating politics not as a seasonal campaign based on candidates, but as a long-term, high-capital investment project.
Like building a business.
Exactly. Focus not just on candidates, but on judges, on institutions, on regulations, and even on shaping the very concept of grassroots action. They achieved structural, lasting change that often eludes traditional political parties. The financial infrastructure, the plumbing we discussed, makes the political revolution possible.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a final provocative thought to consider as you process all this. We've seen how private wealth, often subsidized by public tax breaks through the C3 structure, is used to pursue a political agenda that, according to insiders like DeBose, explicitly favors big business and warns that the little people will get gobbled up.
A stark warning indeed.
So it raises this important question. In a country where $800 billion sits in perpetual private foundations, legally able to support secretive political advocacy groups through the C3-C4 pipeline, is the ultimate price of tax-deductible philanthropy becoming the collapse of political equity? Is the very structure designed for public good now undermining democratic fairness? You decide what to research next.
Thanks for diving in with us today.
We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.